meeting, won't it? Will normally be filmed anyway and go out on the website. We seem to have a deficit of cameras just now. So if anybody doesn't want to be filmed, if the cameras eventually arrive, if they could tell the clerk at the end, please. Thank you very much. If we could then possibly go to the agenda, and apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Councillor Davis, Imberim, and I think it's Councillor Torr and Councillor Gloucester. We've got substitutes in Councillor Williamson and Councillor Gary. Is there any further apologies at all?
We received apologies from Councillor Vivian.
Councillor Vivian, all right, thank you. Okay, urgent business. I've not been notified of any urgent business. Declarations of interest. Has anybody got any declarations of interest? No, thank you very much indeed. I'd be grateful now if members could possibly afford me to go out of order, just so people aren't inconvenienced. And if I could move to the last item on the agenda, which is land at Broadway, Broadway Green Business Park, Foxdenton Lane, and it's obviously to do with the erection of an Aldi store. We've had requests both from Aldi and also there's a late report that the residents have worked very hard to put together that's come into the council. And for those matters, the request from Aldi is to defer the item. And obviously we've only received a report from the residents, I think, late Monday afternoon. And that's a report that they've paid for and spent considerable money and interest in investing in. And I think it's only fair that in the deliberations that is considered and assessed before it's brought back. So if committee agree with me, we could defer that item. Does everybody agree? Thank you very much indeed. Okay. If we go back to the agenda, and the next item is public questions. We've actually received 3 public questions. I intend reading the questions out, and one of the officers will answer it. The first question is, I would like to ask if there is a fine, or if so, how much the fine is that OCC, I would presume that's the council, would have to pay if the outcome of an application does not agree with the planning inspector's decision.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the response to that question is that planning applications are submitted to the local planning authority for consideration, and planning law requires that to the extent that the development plan policies are material to an application, the decision must be taken in accordance with the development plan unless there are material planning considerations that indicate otherwise. And this is set out in the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 and in the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. If any planning application is refused by the local planning authority, the applicant has a right of appeal. They can fulfil this right by submitting their appeal to the planning inspectorate, who is independent of the council. As part of the appeal process, an appellant may, if they consider that the local planning authority has behaved unreasonably in arriving at its decision, apply for an award of costs. Unreasonable behaviour can take many forms, but may include disregard to any known material planning considerations which were relevant to the planning application. This could potentially include disregard of an appeal decision on the same site or at another site where the planning issues are comparable. Where an application is made for an award of costs, the planning inspector must first determine whether this is allowed, either in part or in full. If it is, the appellant would be invited to submit a claim to the local planning authority for the reimbursement of any money spent or lost as a result of its unreasonable behaviour. The extent of any costs would depend upon how much unnecessary expense was incurred by the appellant in preparing for, submitting and being involved in the appeal process. Such costs may include examples such as consultancy fees, travel costs and reimbursement for lost income, but would vary on a case-by-case basis. In some cases, the extent of costs can be significant, especially when an appeal is heard at a public inquiry, where an appellant is more likely to have legal representation or be required to call upon expert witnesses to present evidence. However, it is important to clarify that an award of costs is different to a fine. A fine is usually given as a penalty for breaking the law. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is, how much weight do OCC, that's the Council, attach to the above whilst making recommendations?
Thank you, Chair. All appeal decisions must be afforded weight as material planning considerations when they are thought to be relevant in the assessment of any subsequent planning application. This would especially be the case where the appeal decision relates to the same or similar development on the same site. However, an appeal decision may still be considered relevant even where it relates to a proposed development at a different site, but where the planning issues are clearly comparable. The weight given to such appeal decisions will depend on various factors on a case-by-case basis. For example, how relevant the appeal decision is to the subject matter of any subsequent planning application, and how recently the appeal decision was made, and whether the site circumstances, planning policies, or national guidance have materially changed since that appeal decision was made. The extent of weight given to an appeal decision by the local planning authority will form part of the overall planning balance, whereby the benefits and impacts of development are considered, having regard to adopted policies and other material planning considerations.
Thank you. And the final question is, can I ask who scrutinises or is responsible for photographs and drawing plans in planning applications to ensure they are a true physical representation of what is actually in place on any property concerned? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. An applicant is ultimately responsible for ensuring that any plans submitted with their application are accurate. The assessment of a planning application by the local planning authority is based on the drawings submitted and not necessarily what might have been constructed on site. However, if during the consideration of the application it becomes apparent that there are errors in the drawings or other information supplied, this would be raised with the applicant to address. Sometimes planning applications are made on a retrospective basis, whereby they seek to retain existing development. In such cases, the plans must still reflect what has been constructed unless the application seeks permission to amend it in some way. In the event that planning permission is granted, a condition would be attached listing the approved drawing numbers. If there is any subsequent breach of planning controls whereby development on a site has deviated from any approved plan, and this has been brought to the attention of the local planning authority, this would be investigated as a planning enforcement complaint.
Thank you. And those answers will be sent to the people that submitted them. Thank you. If we go on to the next item, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which I'll move. Is that agreed? Any questions at all arising from them? No? Thanks very much indeed. If we then can go on to the next item, which is 298 Moston Lane East, Oldham, and this is an application that's being brought back after being deferred at the last meeting of the Planning Committee. And as members might be aware and remember, this was an application that was rejected by this committee, went to appeal. The appeal was lost, but it's being brought back in an amended version, and members had a number of issues that they raised at the last meeting, and if I could ask the officers to go through particularly those items that members wanted more information on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is agenda item number 6, 298 Moston Lane East in Chadderton. So a bit of a recap really on given that the application was deferred at the previous planning committee. So the site is on the north-eastern side of Moston Lane East and exists between Broadway and Hollingwood Avenue. And the proposal is for the change of use of the residential dwelling to a residential institution and a single-storey and first-floor rear extensions to the property to facilitate that use. So in terms of just going through the plans, you can see the location of the site defined by the red line boundary on the site location plan on the screen, and there's a satellite image there that shows the same site and the buildings that exist to the rear of the property. I've got some photographs here that show the existing context of the site. So we have a view from Moston Lane East from the front elevation. We have a separate photograph here that shows the rear elevation of the property and its garden, and also shows the outline of some extensions that have been partly constructed, which I'll come on to in a moment. We have here a plan that shows the ground floor of the property prior to any commencement occurring on the site. We have the same first floor plan prior to the commencement of any development on the site. Again, we have the elevation drawings here that show the situation as it was before any development was commenced. And moving on to the proposed plans, we've got the proposed ground floor plan here that shows the extent of the single-storey element of the extensions, which includes those to the elongated section of this extension here at the far end of the garden, and also includes an extension here adjacent to the neighbouring property. And we have a proposed first floor plan here that shows the extent of the two-storey element on the rear elevation, and those are reflected in the proposed elevations that you can see on the screen here. So in terms of providing some context to what is being proposed, we have an extra slide here that wasn't on the previous presentation that shows in blue extensions for which the planning permission is sought, and the locations shown in green show the existing dwelling house before any development essentially commenced at the site. So in terms of a recap really on what's happened since the previous planning committee where the item was deferred, the request from members was to seek additional information from the applicant about the proposed use and how it would be operated and managed, and to provide some clarity on the extent of existing extensions. And there were other matters which are including clarification about the continued objections from environmental health in terms of noise to adjacent properties. So in effect what we've provided on the agenda here is we've done an update report that focuses on those issues that you asked us to do. So it's those that have been taken in turn, and then annexed on to the end of that report is the report that was brought to committee previously, which has not been changed at all. So in terms of the recap, there was a previous planning application on this site for a similar development that was refused by officers under delegated powers in November 2020. And that was on the basis that the frequency of the comings and goings of visitors from the property would result in noise disturbance to surrounding residents, and that the 6-metre extension adjacent to the boundary with number 300 Moston Lane East, which on the plan is at the top of that plan, which is now reduced from 6 metres, which is what it was proposed at previously, and that is proposed at 4 metres. and that reduction was on the basis that at 6 metres it would have resulted in a loss of light to the ground floor windows in that neighbouring property. And it was on that basis that the previous application was refused. So that application, or that decision rather, was then the subject of an appeal to the Planning Inspectorate. And the Planning Inspector considered that the proposed use of the property as a residential institution was acceptable, but the appeal was dismissed on the grounds that the proposed 6-metre extension alongside the boundary of number 300 Mostyn Lane East was unacceptable. So this resubmission is identical to the previous scheme, with the exception that that 6-metre projection has been reduced to 4 metres in order to address both the council's and the inspector's concerns about this element of the proposal. So since the previous meeting, as I've outlined already, the applicant has provided additional information in support of their proposals, and they are set out in the update report. And amongst other things, they set out that the proposed use will be registered with the Care Quality Commission, which regulates such uses. Residents would not have any criminal convictions or a history of any antisocial behaviour and would be supervised at all times. Residents would be those suffering with learning difficulties, mental health needs, autism and respite needs, and would be referred from official bodies, including the NHS. Food deliveries would be brought to the site by staff, and food would be prepared in the kitchen within the building. Laundry would be washed on site, and waste would be stored in a commercial bin located adjacent to the office and control room, which is shown on the drawings. In terms of the continued objection from environmental health officers on noise grounds, that is obviously something that has to be taken into account in the consideration of this application. And whilst it's accepted that they maintain their objection to this revised application, we must give weight to the inspector's conclusion about the appropriateness of the use in this location. And it is a material planning consideration, and officers consider it has significant weight in the determination of this planning application. So essentially we consider the applicant has fully addressed the reason why the appeal was dismissed by reducing the size of the single-storey rear extension adjacent to 300 Mostyn Lane East, and that's been reduced by approximately a third, from 6 metres to 4 metres, and that is the basis on the plans that you've seen. Furthermore, given the potential for the proposed use to cause more disturbance to existing residents during the night, which is the time when background levels of noise from traffic especially are lower, there is a condition attached to the recommendation which would restrict staff shifts starting or ending between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. And the intention of that is obviously to try and limit or reduce the frequency of movements throughout the night, including vehicular movements. And there is a separate condition attached to the recommendation for the avoidance of any doubt, whereby the number of residents would be limited to a maximum of 8. So the application it remains to be the case that the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report. I would like to just briefly draw members' attention to the late list, which makes reference to an additional representation that's been received since the publication of the report. And lastly, I was led to believe the applicant would be attending tonight's meeting to answer any questions from members about the way in which the facility would be operated. That's the introduction, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions of the officer at this time? Councillor Allen.
Thank you. At the previous meeting, one of the questions that I'd raised was in terms of sort of toilet cleaning facilities within the building, because that was, whilst it's not a material consideration in terms of the structure of the building, it is a clear indication of its usability and usefulness, and we are weighing that against, you know, and there doesn't seem to be any information here. Is that, do I just have to wait and ask the applicant?
In terms of that particular point, obviously these questions were relayed to the applicant and their appointed agent, and the response to that element of the questioning was that the facility would be registered and regulated by the Care Quality Commission, which I understand sets the relevant criteria for such use as being acceptable. So strictly speaking, as you allude to, it's not, we can't give it particularly much weight in terms of the internal configuration of the building, in terms of the use. But that is the response that we were provided with, that the Care Quality Commission would set the necessary standards for that use being operational.
Councillor Oldham.
And then the second question is in relation to the sound. Again, question raised at the previous meeting was there is a change to the use of the building in terms of the number of staff on site at any time compared to the number of people who are living there, which is a significant reduction. And in terms of managing that sound, there is a clear difference in the way that it is proposed that the building is operated and used. So in terms of making a comparison for the purposes of how we judge the weight of it to what the inspector said, there is a clear difference in the way the building is operating, which could have an impact and is likely to have an impact on the amount of sound. So if is there no more information on that has been received, and we are just being left to make a judgment on that relevant weight?
Essentially, it's correct. And as I mentioned in the introduction, Environmental Health are maintaining their objection. So it's a difficult balancing exercise to make here. Essentially, members have been asked to consider and give weight to a continued objection from Environmental Health against a planning inspector's decision based on the use. And the advice that we're providing to the members of the committee is that the inspector's decision has significant weight in that balancing exercise, to the point that we feel we need to recommend approval of the application.
I think, if I may, Chair, just to add to that as well. Excuse me. I do think we need to be very clear in this. I understand the concerns being raised and the questions being asked, but obviously what is before us is effectively an application to apply for a C2 residential use, obviously with the associated extensions. Now, a C2 residential use can cover a range of different things. We know that this applicant has a certain plan for what they want to do with this building, but there's nothing stopping the applicant from subsequently selling the building or the property to someone else who might do a slightly different C2 residential institution use. And so I think we have to bear that in mind in terms of when it comes to things like the sound impacts, when it comes to the facilities indoors, it can vary depending on how the building is used, and we can't have any concrete position on that, if you like. You know, you say it could be worse, the sound, because of the staffing situation, but we don't know that, do we, ultimately? We don't know that for sure in terms of how we don't know what the client group exactly will be like at this point in time and what have you. So I think we've got to be careful just to try and focus on the planning matters and not the kind of thing that the CQC would look at in terms of whether they would allow this property to be used in that way. We are looking purely at the physical use and development of the building, if that makes sense.
Did you want to ask a question? No. Any further questions? Okay. I'll just remind members that we are talking about the application in planning terms. I know it's easy to go off at a tangent, but basically if we could keep to the planning matters and the planning issues, you know, within the report. We do have now a speaker on behalf of the objectors, Mr. John Judge. And Mr. Judge, you'll get 3 minutes, and when you've got 30 seconds to go, you'll be told. So if you want to go ahead, please.
Policy 9 states there is an identified need to build 3-bedroom properties. 298 Moston Lane East already exist and would help fulfil that need. Potential for unacceptable noise levels in the rear garden and immediate surrounding area is a very real likelihood. Environmental Health, after being contacted again by the Planning Department, continue their resistance to this change of use to C2. Environmental Health are a professional body, and as such, significant weight should be attached to their considered opinions. All commercial properties in Moston Lane East are based at the ends of the road and close at the end of each business day. Many do not open at weekends. This institution would be situated in the centre of the residential part of Moston Lane East and be open 24 hours a day, every day, all year round. It would be surrounded by residential properties. The potential for excessive noise at any time is very real, as outlined by Environmental Health. Why was this proposal compared to an HMO or large family living at 298? The planning inspector says in her report it is not possible to be categorical about how many people might occupy the house if used as a single dwelling. The planning inspectorate report was based on 8 p.m. cut-off. Oldham Council have indicated that deliveries, visits, comings and goings, etc. after the 8 p.m. cut-off is unreasonable and unenforceable. Section 4 of the update report states the original recommendation includes a condition preventing staff shifts starting or ending between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. The planning inspector's report refers to staff shift changeovers not occurring between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. and would consist of 12-hour shifts. The inspectorate report states the proposed extension would have a flat roof, which would be clearly visible above the boundary fence. A 2-metre reduction in length does not address this issue. The solid nature of the extension would have an overbearing impact and would dominate the outlook, resulting in a loss of light, particularly in the early part of the day, creating a tunnelling effect and making this rear room very dark for 300 Moston Lane East. Reducing the length of this extension will not stop loss of light or the tunnelling effect or eradicate the overbearing impact on 300. This proposed development would unacceptably harm the living conditions of the occupants of 300 Moston Lane East. The planning inspector stated this proposal would have a detrimental impact on the living conditions of the occupiers of 300
30 seconds.
with regard to outlook and light, which is why she rejected the appeal, and there is nothing of any real substance that has been proposed that materially changes this viewpoint. There was no recommendation from the planning inspector to reduce the length of the above extension from 6 metres to 4 metres. This proposal is trying to shoehorn as much as possible into a restricted space. If this was planned in your ward, how would your residents react? As far as Moston Lane residents are concerned, you, the Council Planning Committee, have reasonable grounds to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Judge. Has anybody got any questions of Mr. Judge? No, thank you. In that case, could I ask Mr. Naheem to address the meeting? You have 3 minutes, Mr. Naheem, and you'll be given notice when you've got 30 seconds left. So you can start when you want.
Thanks, Chairman, and good evening, members.
I'm sorry, haven't we got Mr...
Sorry?
Have we got Mr. Naheem here? No?
Chair, I don't think he's here. I don't think he's
I'm
arrived.
sorry about that. He did the applicant did register to speak, and obviously he's not here. So that's why I've called him. No? Okay then. We then go forward, and we do have Councillor Shuttleworth, who's the councillor for the ward, making representations.
Thanks, Chair, and my apologies for the interruption. Good evening, members, once again. I intend to follow up on some of the comments I made last month when speaking against this application, as well as provide you with further information since that meeting. I received, as did my colleague Councillor Goodwin, written contact from the applicant which enclosed a statement and an invitation to meet with him to discuss this issue. We didn't take up this offer as quite simply the persons he should have been talking to were the residents 18 months ago, as well as the adult social care team here in Oldham to establish if there was a need for this facility. It would also appear that Mr Naeem is reluctant to attend this meeting to talk to you as members, and I hope I quote the chairman correctly when he said that a notice needs to go out and strongly recommend to him that he attends, but he's chosen not to do. Some of the content within the statement we received has been repeated by the planning team and is within your papers. I'll cover what may not be, as well as commenting on what is. As I pointed out last month in the first application in 2020, certain statements were made in support of the application, and I repeat this one. And I quote, "The property was previously under the ownership of the Methodist Church for several years, who had other outbuildings at the rear where the nuns used to reside, as well as holding Sunday school there." I challenged that statement last month, and what is now being said by Mr Naeem has changed, and it reads, "With regard to the site at Moston Lane East, the applicant purchased a dwelling in 2001 from the Methodist Church, and it was used by the vicar as a dwelling." So what's happened to the nuns in the outbuildings? Were they ever there? And what's brought about the change? Also note there is no reference now to the property being empty over recent years. After I brought your attention, the electoral register had a Joanne Hall living there as recent as 2020. Quote again, "The applicant will register the property with the Care Quality Commission." So despite not having spoken with our own social care team, there has been no engagement in the CQC either. So assumptions are being made again as to the acceptability of both the location and the development. A further quote, "Food will be brought to the site by members of staff as they come on shift. Easy to say now, but what is the reality? Can you honestly imagine an individual collecting food each day for 8 residents and no doubt staff? Or is this an answer to suit the application and will change to one of regular delivery?" He also quotes, "Government guidelines for these types of facilities are there to be situated, government guidelines for these types of facilities are that they are situated in residential areas." This is something of a red herring, as everyone lives in a community irrespective of whether they're able to live completely independently or not. All of our Commission-supported living services are in local communities across the borough. The site is off-street parking, we are told, with a capacity for about 4 vehicles. This is a domestic property, and to get 3 vehicles on would be very tight, let alone 4. And when you're asked to believe there will be no traffic issues or disturbance for neighbours, how do you think that they would manage to place the waste bins, commercial size, on the street for emptying? All the vehicles would have to come off and then back on again, only to repeat this process to enable the bins to be returned. Presumably there will be health practitioners visiting the site on a regular basis. Where will they park? The 8 residents will no doubt receive visitors, so there could be as many as 16 visitors at the same time. Where would they park? He goes on to say, "The occupants will be supervised by staff at all times. If they leave the property, they will be accompanied by staff at all times." So think about this statement. 4 staff, one no doubt busy all day, preparing meals and cleaning up after each meal. So 3 staff undertake supervision. Is there a possibility of 3 residents going for a walk, accompanied, leaving 1 staff member busy preparing the next meal to also supervise 5 residents? I'm not going to sit here and say that the residents are a risk to others. I am simply offering a response to the statement made. He also adds, the proposal is not overdevelopment of the site. I will now quote again from the Planning Inspector's report dated 22nd of March 2021. I consider an increase from 4 bedrooms to 9 represents significant intensification in the use of the house. On 2 occasions, the applicant states in relation to a section of the extension that it has been reduced from 6 metres to 4. Has this really been carried out? If it has, when? Who has suggested it? And just how much difference would it make to the overall development? I've sent you members recent images of this section of the development, and you'll hopefully agree with the planning inspector who also commented, although the extension will have a flat roof, it will still be clearly visible above the boundary fence. So therefore, it impacts on the neighbours. The inspector went on to say, consequently, I consider the proposed development would unacceptably harm the living conditions of the occupiers at 300 Moston Lane East, with particular regard to outlook and light. Even if it was reduced by 2 metres, I hope we would agree that this comment still holds. I now turn to the revised planning papers and would ask you to look at page 7 and the 3rd paragraph under point 4. For whatever reason, the planning officer decided to include a comment about HMO. Exactly why I don't know. This isn't a HMO, unless of course someone knows differently, should planning permission be granted this evening. As you'll also note, the environmental team have maintained their position so far as noise and disturbance are concerned, despite further discussion with the planning team. This is an assisted living facility, and when residents express their concern about what may take place, let me quote you this from a resident who lives near such a facility, approximately 1 mile away from Moston Lane East. When the facility was first proposed, all of my family had no objection to it. I even rang to discuss it with the relevant people to make sure what they meant by people with learning difficulties. At this point, we were quite happy about accepting the facility into our community. When the facility opened, we began to see some disturbances. In the first instance, there was a gentleman at the facility who would spend a lot of his time outside in all weathers shouting for help. From this point, we realised this was a bigger issue than someone just shouting. The individual, has lived in the facility since it opened, and despite many meetings, including facility meetings arranged by a councillor to find a solution to this issue, to this day, A still stands outside and shouts. We are told there is nothing they can do. We have neighbours now who are selling up because the noise situation not getting any better. The Northfield one is a purpose-built property in its own grounds. Allow me to give you a reason for refusal by the planning officer. As said, it is proposed there will be 9 residents, we know it's now 8, on site and 6 members of staff, we're now told there's 4, at the property at any one time. In addition to this, it is likely that visitors will attend the site, as I explained. It goes on to say the single story extension adjacent to the boundary within 300 Moston Lane East would, in combination with the single story outrigger at 300, create a significant tunneling effect. It's still there. Both of the reasons for refusal hold good, and if they don't, why not, as nothing has changed. This is a family home. There has been no indication the applicant has attempted to sell this as such, despite the desperate need for such housing which is in a desirable location. I urge all members to reject this application. Thank you, Chair.
Have any members got any questions of Councillor Sutcliffe? Yes, Councillor Williamson.
On page 6, it states that the applicant has advised officers that the Care Quality Commission requires such facilities to conform to strict criteria providing care for the residents, and then it goes on. So can I just clarify that you said that he hadn't been in contact with them to see whether this facility was required?
sorry, in contact with?
The Care Quality Commission, or whoever it is that he needs to get in contact with to see whether that facility is required.
I think in other papers he says he will register it with the Care Quality Commission. He never said he has done.
Yeah, I think we do have now Mr. Naheem here, who will allow to address the meeting and then ask questions. You know, so it might be more appropriate if that question's addressed to him. Is there any further questions of Councillor Sutcliffe? No? Okay then. If I could ask Mr. Naheem to speak to the committee. You do have 3 minutes. When you've had 2.5 minutes, you'll be notified that you've got 30 seconds left, Mr. Naheem. And then if you could possibly answer questions from members of the committee, we'd be grateful. Thank you. If you press the button in front of you so you can put the mic on. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity to present my case to the Planning Committee. Dear members, thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak in support of this planning application. My name is Mohammed Naheem. I am the CEO of Westwood Home Care and also the house owner. The company is run primarily as a domiciliary care service, providing personalised, client-centred care in Manchester area. The company has 4 branches: Manchester, Bolton, Heel Green, Stockport and Liverpool. Furthermore, a planning application is currently in for a change of use to transitional social care at Scholl Street, Oldham, which is proceeding towards a favourable conclusion. Regard to this site, 298 Moston Lane East, Chadderton, the proposal to change of use to a transitional social care was subject to a previous appeal. The inspector raised 3 main issues in respect of the proposed use. Firstly, the inspector considered the residents would receive visits from other professionals as well as family and friends, but such movements were likely and largely be during daytime rather than the evening or late at night. Furthermore, given the appeal of the property was located in a relatively busy through road and there were variable of commercial uses that attract customers in the vicinity. The inspector was not persuaded that this would adversely affect the living conditions of nearby residents. Secondly, the evidence also shows that there was a high demand for supported accommodation such as this. Thirdly, it was not disputed that the property was an accessible location with good access to public transport and range of services and facilities. The use was accepted by the inspector, and therefore the sole issue for members to decide is whether the 4-metre rear extension is acceptable to the living conditions of number 300. I have responded to the members' queries raised in the last planning committee
30 seconds.
through the planning officers, and briefly, the rear outrigger has been there many years and was situ 2001 when I bought the property. The bin store area will be outside the property, away from public views. The use will be registered with the CQC and the high standards care, which needs to be met. The needs to be met and laundry and food provision will be undertaken on site. Also, can I, last paragraph now?
Well, last one, quick.
Okay. Some local residents are of the misconception that the property will be used as a HMO. However, it is not intention. Furthermore, the residents' care home is within the use of Class C2 and the HMO is in use of Class C4, difference of use of class. On the above basis, the committee members are requested to approve the application. However, meantime, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think one of the questions that was being asked when you actually arrived was, the relationship with the Care Quality Commission and how you would actually engage them, or have you already engaged them?
The CQC obviously only get involved once the planning's been accepted, approved, then they will come in and we will register the property with them under their own banner.
Thank you. Is there any further questions? We've got a number anyway. If we start in... right. Councillor?
Can I just ask you what age range your clients will be, please?
Clients are referred to us by social services and other bodies, but I assume they will be adults. They will be adults.
So you don't know?
Yeah.
No, the rooms designed, if you look at the plans, they're designed to get them get them back to rehabilitation, back into society. But also, if we're going to be doing, respite care, people with autism, mental health issues, but there will be care there, supported accommodation 24/7.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson?
Yeah, can I just clarify my point again? So, even before you do any building work, whatever that you've got to do, you don't need to get in contact with the Care Quality Commission to see whether there is a need for this type of property.
Sorry, CQC is a government body that supervises the work, the quality of work that we're doing correctly, that we're giving the right support for the right needed person. The national government have indicated a lot that this is the way forward, that they want these kind of accommodations.
I think what people are trying to tease out is that are you and do you understand and have you achieved the standards that of the accommodation, the physical accommodation that the Care Quality Commission would require?
100%, we would.
All right, thank you. Councillor Hoban.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. The first, I know the relevant to Councillor Shuttleworth's talk. The applicant has said there's a high demand, which has been refuted. Could he tell me where his information is that there is high demand for this kind of property?
I mean, you have to look at the current news about people with mental health during lockdown and so forth. It's a situation, it's that it's in the public news, it is in national news. It is in high demand. People do need accommodation like this. And we can't discriminate against anyone.
But have you actually got proof that the area have said there is a demand for this in the area?
Yeah, we can get you proof from the National Health, CCG, where they say one particular need is when disabled people reside by themselves and they need respite care. So, for example, if you're taking care of someone disabled and you're doing it 24/7 and you want to go on holiday, what do you do with that person? Well, you send them to us, we'll take care of them whilst they have a break.
Right, Ms Naheem, but it's been said that you haven't approached Oldham Council or the relevant body at Oldham.
I think that
high demand.
I think, in all honesty, we have to be careful here because we're straying into the commercial element of it and who's providing what. And, we're talking about a planning application for a facility.
Well said.
If I may say, Chair, we're here to represent the residents as well, aren't we? So we need to get the facts of what's come back here as well.
I'm just saying that what we have to be careful of here is that we actually are looking at the planning application and deciding whether the facility is suitable for the need.
Well, that's okay, but I'm asking, the applicant said there was a high demand, which is relevant to the case for having the property used at that point. Is there a high demand? Has he got proof that it's high demand? Because the previous speaker said he hadn't approached anybody to find out if there was demand in the area.
Chair. If
Could I answer?
Well, could I just ask Mr. Richard?
Yeah, I think just got to be careful with our line of questioning in that sense, because in a sense, whether there is a need or demand isn't relevant in this case. This is a commercial enterprise, if you like. There's no requirement in policy saying you can only have this use if there's a need or demand. You know, so from a planning point of view, that is not relevant at this point in time. If we had a policy that said that, it would be, but we don't. And I think we have to be, you know, it's drawing to draw a parallel, maybe say, if someone wanted to convert a unit to a shop or a restaurant, we wouldn't question, is there a demand for that restaurant? Is there a demand for that shop? It's not, so, and this is a commercial business enterprise, so we just got to be careful and not stray into those areas which is not planning considerations in this case. That's all we're trying to say. And so there's been a few questions about need and demand, but I come back to what I said earlier, that this is really ultimately about, is the use appropriate in this location, and is the physical extensions that are proposed appropriate in the planning.
But isn't my question trying to find out if it is appropriate use in this location?
No, we're not talking about whether it's needed or demanded. We're saying, is having that facility there in that location, is it appropriate in terms of the potential impacts on the surrounding area? It's not about whether there's a need for it.
Councillor Brownridge.
No, it's all right, Chair. I think I'll leave it till we enter the discussion. Thank you.
Councillor Gary, did you want to come back?
If it's appropriate, Chair, I just got a comment to the planning officer. You've just called it a commercial enterprise, which is going to be right into the heart of a residential community. The other thing I should have picked up on and I didn't do earlier is how high the building going to show over the top of the fence. When the sun goes down or whatever, what amount of darkness is going to be for number 300, and which will it affect their garden? And do we give weight to the fact that the property price at number 300 could be affected?
Could that be addressed in afterwards? We're just now asking questions of the applicant. And if anybody else has got any further questions of the applicant, Councillor Alan-Darnay.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to there's a objection from Environmental Health about the levels of sound that could occur. There has been a change in terms of what you've said, the number of staff on site compared to the number of residents. Have you done any kind of updated assessment, bearing in mind that change, of what levels of noise would be resulting and whether that's made any difference to the application?
Good question. That will go under the building control officers and sound and so forth. My understanding is on that. As mentioned in the statement, most of the building accommodation is at the rear of the building. So on the new extension, you'll do your installation, your kingspan, your boards for sound, internal sound. I mean, there's not going to be no functions there. It's mainly just care. But again, that'll come under building regs when we submit building regs in.
Thank you. Councillor Orban, did you want to ask another question?
Yeah, but I don't know whether it's similar to the previous question that I've been kicked back with, and it's the question that was raised before about the number of staff and the number of residents, and whether I'll take it further to the night time. And if we've got 8 residents there and only 4 members of staff, and a few of them want to go out, where does that leave it then?
Okay, well, can you tell us what the number of residents is going to be and what the staffing ratio is both during the day and at night?
The ratio is as mentioned in the statement. I mean, the key factor here is that There's self-contained bedrooms with en-suites, disability access and so forth. There'll be 24-hour CCTV system, secure, residents will only go out if there's a group, or they'll be accompanied by their loved ones if they want to take them out. So it's not like we'll be taking them out unless there's a group planned.
Yeah. So there is not...
Possibly you could answer the staffing arrangements for both for during the night and during the day. Have you got...
During the night there'll be 2.
Right.
And during the day there'll be 4.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then again, there's a contradiction there, because the applicant said nothing will be done overnight time, really, and now he's saying that family could be there overnight taking the people out. So we've got too many contradictions for me.
So I apologise for that, because I didn't say that. I clearly said 2 during the night and 4 during the day. And I also said, excuse me, I'm not finished. I also said that we won't be having people coming. I'm just saying, just in case they do, loved ones can take their people out. This is what I'm trying to say. Misconception of the whole idea is scaremongering people. Councillor should have asked.
Okay. Councillor Alandani.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question I asked earlier, which we didn't have an answer to at the time. In terms of, the use of the building is for sort of supported accommodation, people with learning difficulties, mental health needs, and so on. I haven't seen anything in the plans to indicate toilets with lifting facilities, hoists, that sort of thing, which would extend the usefulness of this building for a wider range of people.
Very good question and appreciated. But this is just a change of use application. So detailed drawings can come forward later after the planning. The application is change of use. So building regs are such as hoists, lifts. I mean, you get electric beds, you get hoists, you go get disabled. It's all ground level, most of it. And then obviously it's suitability of the patient, whether if they can go up to the first floor or whether just stay. Most of it's on ground floor if you look at the plans. Thank you.
Okay. Have we got any further? Yes, Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question to the applicant. It's regarding the extension. I'm just a bit concerned about the length and also the height of the extension, similar to my other colleagues. So if, for example, it won't go above the barrier to the neighbour's property, I'm just concerned about, for example, windows for the residents that might potentially live in there. Can you just quickly clarify and expand on that, please? Thank you.
The property is known as 298 Moston Lane East. It's already got an extension of that level. And 298A is already extension at that level. We are not going above the roof line of existing buildings.
Okay. I've got no further indications of questions. Thank you very much.
Chair, could I just ask one thing of you? Mr Judge and myself both finished within time. You granted Mr Naheem an extension. I've got a quote from the social care team that came late this afternoon that I chose not to include because of the time factor. Would you allow me 30 seconds to make their comment?
Well, it would, but we're considering you had 7 minutes. We'll carry on. Yeah.
Thank you. It says, the Council already has a Commission framework arrangement in place with 6 providers from whom we purchase these type of services, in addition to MyoCare. This framework has been put in place through a competitive tendering process where quality of care and the delivery model have been thoroughly evaluated. Therefore, if the application is approved and the service established, we would not be seeking to commission care from this provider. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're now going into an open debate about it and finding out where members want to go with this. Councillor Bramridge.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've got a real dilemma here. residential amenity and the impact of the use on residential amenity is a planning consideration. And how can we judge whether there's an impact on residential amenity without looking at how this building will operate? Now, I appreciate we can't get into a huge lot of commercial differences and it's a C2 use. I appreciate what the planning officer said. The fact is the applicant has proposed a very specific use for a very specific cohort. He tells us he runs these facilities already. So there's absolutely no reason why he can't tell us whether this accommodation will meet the standards of the CQC, because otherwise we could approve this use. The CQC could turn around and say it doesn't meet our standards, and we've approved a use that then can't be implemented, and some other use would have to be found. That does not seem to be responsible planning to me. I have no clear idea of how this business would operate in terms of movements in and off the site. We're told it's not a secure unit, so residents aren't locked up, quite rightly. So what's to stop them all going out in the garden, singing, having a party? I don't know. I just really do not understand how this business is going to operate. And because of that, I do not understand how we can possibly say that absolutely categorically that this will not have a negative impact on residents who live next door and at the back of it. In practical terms, I don't consider that knocking a couple of metres off the extension is going to make the situation at 300 acceptable. You're still going to have a tunnel effect. You're still going to have a loss of light. It might be not as bad as it was, but it's still not going to be acceptable. The extension on the other side of the site that we haven't talked about at all is massive. I know they've got a huge extension that's appeared by some over historical time, but the extensions to that extension are absolutely huge. They come very close to the boundary with the property at the rear, completely out of proportion to the original house, out of character with the surrounding area. Talking about waste disposal, good, we're going to have one commercial waste bin, so we're not going to do any recycling on this site then. And how are we going? I mean, I can take Councillor Shuttleworth's point. You've got a bin in the front garden which is full of cars. How do we get out to the back of footpath where it's going to be collected and back in again? I asked for a waste disposal strategy. All I've got is it's a commercial bin that will be at the front of the house at site and nobody will be able to see it. That's not a waste disposal strategy and it's not acceptable. It really isn't. It's just not good enough. And I mean, I take the point about the inspector saying there wasn't going to be noise and disturbance, but she made that comment without any evidence or knowledge of how the site was going to be operated. And I still am really concerned about this because we do not know what's going to happen. Appreciate that in the working day, it's a noisy area, lots of traffic, fine. But after that, we do not know enough about what's going to happen with this business in terms of movement of people and activities on the site. I mean, are they all going to shut in their bedrooms all night? I do not know. So I don't see how we can legitimately say or categorically say there won't be a noise nuisance. And I would like to leave that option on the table. But if the planners feel that is such a material, I mean, it's a material consideration, I think the weight attached to it reduces because we do not know enough to make that judgment. And my final point is that obviously one of the justifications for this was about need, and we have to provide a variety of accommodation. We are now clearly being told that our own council would not commission these services. We haven't had any evidence that any other authorities are going to commission these services. We've got the loss of a substantial family home for which we know there is undoubted demand across this borough, as evinced by our enormous housing waiting list. So the weight attached to providing this specialist accommodation in the absence of any proof that it's actually going to be used for that use seems to me to be considerably lessened, and the weight for retaining a valuable family home seems to be increased. So I would like to recommend refusal, and I will give you a brief outline of the grounds, the planning grounds that I would make that recommendation on if you're happy with that, or do you want to wait for other people to speak?
No, I think it'd be excellent if you made the case and then people can speak to that.
Fair enough, Chair, thank you. So the first reason would be the original reason, the tunnelling effect on 300. The second reason would be that the additional extensions adjoining number 296, disproportionate to the original house, harmful to the character of the area, and detrimental to the amenity of surrounding properties by virtue of scale and proximity. 3, there is insufficient details of how waste will be dealt with. There's no provision for recycling and no evidence that the commercial bin could be moved to the collection point through the car park. 4, in the absence of any evidence that this this accommodation is appropriate for its approved residents and there are any local commissioners supporting it, the advantages for providing this specialist accommodation do not outweigh the loss of a substantial family home for which there is a demonstrable demand. And then my 5th reason would be that we don't have evidence to determine that there would be no harm to amenity by virtue of noise and disturbance outside normal working hours. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any members want to speak to what Councillor Brownridge has moved? Councillor Oldham.
I'd like to add to it. There's a worry, and I think I heard it right before off the head of planning, that we could, if we allowed this, then the use could change with the change of ownership, and it could be something very different once it had been passed. Is that right?
No.
I just wanted to clarify on that.
If I could ask advice, I don't think that's the case. But
What I was trying to say is that within the use class C2, there is a range of different services that can be provided, residential institutions services. So it's not necessarily it's hard to say in terms of you don't know exactly if the applicant was to sell it on in the future to someone else who would offer a slightly different C2 use. We don't quite know what that client group would be. But obviously it's all within the C2 use still. So it wouldn't be a change of use. It's just about within the permission that would be granted if that was the case tonight on this application, any C2 use would be possible.
Councillor.
Sorry about me coughing earlier.
All right.
I'm happy to support Councillor Brownridge's proposal with a further addition that it is a commercial property within a residential area. Thank you.
Does any other members want to make a contribution? Councillor Landani.
Thank you. Thank you to Councillor Brownridge for that very lucid explanation of the reasons. You referred several times to the lack of information, and that really is a concern for me. We deferred this decision because we wanted more information on it, and I think that was in part because there is a recognition that there can be applications for this type of use. And that would be a positive thing. So there was a difficult decision there in terms of weighing that up. But we were looking for information to show that the balance was in favour of development. And in terms of the answers to the questions we've asked, it doesn't feel like we've got sort of coherent, thought out and evidenced arguments to back that up. And it is a difficult balance, and I would like, I would like to see an application here which ticked all those boxes. I want to see a good application because having this kind of support for people is really important. But it feels like every time we've asked a question, we've not really got an answer, and there's too much in the balance to make a good considered judgment.
Thank you. Anybody else want to contribute? Refusal's been moved and seconded. Could I ask for officers' comments before we go to a vote?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, there's obviously a few things to go through there in terms of the reasons for refusal, but some of the comments too. I think, first of all, just taking, before we get into the reasons for refusal, taking the latter comment from Councillor Al-Hamdani, I think that the challenge with this kind of use and this kind of application is that, as I was referring to before with Councillor Hoban's query, is that there can be a number of different client groups that a C2 use can cover. And in an application like this, if you like, what we are not considering is, should we permit just the client group that is being asked for or that is being proposed would be in from the applicant at this point in time? What we are being asked to determine is, will we allow a C2 use, residential institution, and that can be varied. So in terms of the information about how the site would be or the facility would be managed, exactly what the impacts of the client group might be on the neighbouring community and what have you, there is always going to be a bit of uncertainty. And in fact, in every decision, not just about C2 uses, you know, this could be revert to a residential dwelling house and you could have the neighbour from hell. You know, so we don't know ever for certain what the impacts are going to be, but we try to assess as best we can on the information before us. I do appreciate what several members have said tonight, that it is difficult in this situation, that because of that lack of certainty, you know, how do we understand what the impact of the use will be on the local community? And I'm not taking away from that. I know it is difficult. This is not a straightforward case. But I come back to, again, the fact it's why the reasons for refusal were what they were last time, is that it comes down to, are we comfortable this is an appropriate use, C2, in this location? Are we comfortable with the extent of the extensions proposed? And I feel previously we weren't on both those accounts. The inspector has come to a different view on the use, and as officers we have to say very clearly that that is a significant material consideration that we have to weigh into the balance, and they were aware of our environmental health officers' concerns when they made that decision too. The extensions, obviously, they've been, or the extension in particular that the inspector had a concern with, has been reduced. So the question is, are we comfortable, or are you comfortable as a committee, that that has been reduced enough to satisfy that concern? So, but I do appreciate the issue or the challenge that we face in terms of evidence information. So therefore, going through the different proposed reasons for refusal of the motion that's been put forward, the first one linked to the tunnelling effect, again, that comes back to are we content that the proposed reduction in extension is sufficient? And so if that is the view of this committee ultimately tonight, that it's not, and that should be a reason for refusal, I think that's a reasonable one that we can work with. The extensions generally being out of character and scale, if I can paraphrase what the councillor said there in that sense. Again, it's a planning matter, absolutely. The only concern I would have with that is that, again, in terms of our reason for refusal last time, it was purely about the extension on one side of the one side of the house, not the rest of the extensions, and particularly the extension to the outrigger. We didn't refuse it on that basis previously, and likewise the inspector didn't raise that as a concern. So I think that would be a little bit dubious, if you like, given what we've said in the past. The waste management plan, I understand the position. Again, there's an element of it comes down to the management of the facility, which until you know, in a C2 use, it can vary, as I say, and we've got to be careful we don't stray out of planning in that sense. But I appreciate some of the comments made in relation to the access to the waste bins and what have you, particularly on collection days and what have you. Again, I'd stress that we didn't raise this as a reason for refusal previously, and it hasn't been raised prior to this application. But, you know, it is one we can potentially look at, but I'll ask Martin to come back on that in a moment, if that's okay. Absence of an evidence of demand and the loss of the residential. Again, I understand the concerns raised, but it comes back to what I was saying earlier in response to what Councillor Hoban was saying, that it's not about evidence of demand in this situation. The loss of one residential unit, I understand where you're coming from on that, but ultimately it's about, in the planning system, what we are working with is a system where it's about the rights of a person who owns a property to make reasonable changes to their property, as long as it doesn't impact negatively on the wider community or and what have you. That's in essence what we'll look at in planning. So, you know, it is for that person, if they want to take a risk, should we say, in terms of from that commercial element of their business, that they want to go ahead, convert this property to C2 if they get permission, but then don't get any clients because there isn't that demand. Well, that's their commercial risk they've taken, and while that might be frustrating and it might seem crazy to us from one point of view, it is their right to do that if we grant permission because we think the use is an appropriate use in this location. It's not about whether we think it will be filled or whether there's demand or not. In terms of the loss of amenity and noise impact, I think we've covered that already, but I think, again, it comes back to really is the use appropriate in this location or not, and I've given you my views on that already. And just to clarify again, in terms of the further proposed reason for refusal from, was it Councillor Gary, in terms of the commercial element, to clarify what I was saying earlier, what I mean is that it is a business from the point of view of the applicant. You know, they are, they will obviously receive an income for caring for these individuals, these client groups and what have you. Obviously, it is still a residential institution, so it's different. It's not, we're not talking, I drew the comparison with a shop or a restaurant from the pure point of view of, you know, that risk, if you like, that an applicant takes. They can go for such a thing, but if there's no demand for it, it'll fall through, and they'll have taken that risk from a commercial business point of view. But the bottom line is what we are talking about is not a commercial use, it's a residential institution from a planning point of view, but obviously it's run as a commercial business is what I was trying to clarify. So I think in terms of the reason refusal that you proposed, I wouldn't be comfortable with that going in there, because we are talking about a residential institution, not a commercial business use, such as a commercial, such as E-class use, if that makes sense. Martin, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. You made reference to the suggested refusal reason on the absence of appropriate waste management arrangements in place. You've seen from the report that environmental health haven't raised any issues with what's been proposed. But if that was the the only issue, for example, my advice would be that could be appropriately dealt with by way of a pre-development or pre-occupation condition, which would require further information to be submitted, which we could liaise with colleagues in environmental health and any other others about to make sure we have an appropriate scheme in place. So I think that one could be mitigated through the imposition of a condition.
Thank you. Okay, do you want to contribute?
It's quite disappointing. It's not just this one as well. It's nowhere in where anything is weighed against this decision. Nowhere does anybody say anything about the weight of the residents that don't want it. So where does that come in? Is that not a consideration that we can take into account that the vast majority of the residents don't want it?
Not want to be blunt about it, but no, it's not about a popularity contest. Planning is not a popularity contest.
No, but if there is enough residents, is that not a material decision? Sorry, Chair, I'm just a bit naive.
I think, yes, I think that obviously there's a planning application, and planning applications and this committee have to work within the rules of the system. And the system is laid down both by the local plan and government legislation. So we have to work within those guidelines, and we have to make sure that the planning applications comply and are along the guidelines. And I think that where we're at this stage is that we've got a motion for this application to be refused, which has been seconded. And I'll take any more contributions towards that, and then we'll go to the vote. There's no further contributions and no further advice.
Sorry, Chair. Do we need to clarify the reasons for refusal?
Well, I think Councillor Brownridge went through quite a number of reasons for a refusal. I think if we are, I think as well that we have to emphasise that possibly isn't enough been done to lessen the impact of the tunnelling and the overbearing aspects of the adjoining the extensions that are going to be provided. I don't think you mentioned that, but if you could go through the other reasons.
No, well, as I say, I'm happy to withdraw. Well, I'm not happy. I will withdraw the noise one, although I remain really quite incensed about this, that we're being asked to approve a residential institution and then are not allowed to take account of how it actually operates in terms of the activity associated with that residential institution. I do not find that acceptable. Residential amenity is a legitimate planning concern. That's where the residents come in, not because they don't like it, but we have to make an assessment of whether it actually will have a negative impact on their quality of life. I think the questions that have been asked and the views that have been expressed by the committee and by obviously the local resident and the local councillor are the view is that this will have a detrimental impact on residential amenity, and I for one have not been given any confidence that that isn't the case. And I am concerned that, bearing in mind the previous application was determined by officers without member involvement, that we are being told almost that we're not allowed to raise any other issues because they weren't raised originally, and I don't regard that as acceptable. And in terms of the other extension, the one next to I've lost my count of my numbers now, 296, this is the first time that we've actually had it clarified that some of those extensions were legitimate and some of them aren't. We haven't even been told until now that some of those extensions were lawful, however they came about, and some weren't. So I would maintain very strongly that I want my first four reasons for refusal. I'm happy for the planners to tidy the words up, and I think my words are quite good enough. But I'm happy for those four. I will reluctantly withdraw the noise one if we really think that the inspector's, very limited evidence on which she made her view is materially outweighs the fact that we are not convinced by that. If that's generally the case, I'll have to be, guided by that. But I'm not prepared to withdraw any of the other reasons for refusal, Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, can I just come back on?
I personally like to keep the noise one in if you go, and the reason
so
for
would
that,
I, Chair.
The reason for that is that obviously it's evidenced by our environmental health comments on it.
Chair, if I may, just just to clarify then, so I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, and obviously, as I say, we will tidy up the wording later, as you say, but in terms of the 5 conditions, therefore, 5 reasons for refusal, sorry, tunnelling effect one, I was, I think that was clear. In terms of the other extensions and the scale, overall kind of scale and character of the development, I think just first of all to clarify a point you made there, Councillor, in terms of the legitimacy of the existing extensions prior to the commencement of this current development. While I appreciate it's frustrating that maybe they weren't developed in the correct way originally by the owner at that time, given the passage of time now, because it has been some, I think 20 years, hasn't it, since that outrigger was put in. That's not a factor that we can weigh in. The outrigger
I'm
is there.
sorry if I wasn't clear. I appreciate that. It was the extensions to that extension I was talking about. I appreciate the actual original garage flat thing is there. It's the fact it's longer and wider. So specifically the extensions to that building I'm talking about. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. I apologise.
Thank you for that. Waste management plan, as my colleague mentioned, we feel that could be dealt with through a condition. But if you insist you want that as a reason of refusal, okay. I think the 4th one is the one actually I had most concern about in terms of the absence of a clear demand for this use. I think that's where I would So that's a bit...
But again, if I can clarify, perhaps not being clear, I'm not really talking about demand per se. What I'm saying is that you would weigh up, we know we've got a demand for a house and we're losing that, and you would allow that loss of a house because you're going to get something that's better. And all I'm saying is I don't think we've got enough weight to say that the loss of that house can be justified. So it's not so much that there isn't a demonstrable need, it's that the loss of a substantial family home for which there is proven demand hasn't been justified. So we have no evidence that the applicants tried to sell it as a house and has failed, which was one of the general comments that were made. We have no evidence that it's not lettable, and that's my concern. It's the loss of the family house for which we know there's demand, and the weight attached to the alternative use seems to me to be limited because we don't know that it's going to be used for that purpose. And I take your point about it being a commercial risk, but at the end of the day, we risk granting planning permission for something that then remains empty, and you've got a massive building then for which an alternative use is going to be found, and it's not going to go back to a private house because it'll be too big. And that's my concern. So I entirely understand the difficult position you're in, because planning doesn't really allow us to ask any of these questions that are practical and normal. But that is the concern, isn't it, that I think we're expressing here as a committee, that whilst we appreciate it's a commercial risk, the implications of that going wrong are severe for the people who live there, and we're left having to pick up the pieces, and we're trying to prevent that situation happening as best we can. If you really think that decision, that is unarguable, but I'm happy for it to be reworded, and so it's about the loss of a house in the absence of any justification. That's my concern, not the alternative use per se, if that helps.
It does. Well, it helps in terms of my understanding. It wouldn't necessarily change my view on that reason for refusal. I do think that would be very hard for us to defend at an appeal. There's no policy that we have locally or there is nationally that would support that position in terms of weighing the retention of one residential dwelling, because we're not sure what the alternative use quite will, whether it will ultimately be fruitful, if you like. My recommendation would be not to have that as a reason for refusal. I think in terms of the remaining four, therefore, you're the councillors, that they are. It's your right to put those reasons for refusal forward and vote on it and what have you. I do obviously have an obligation as a council officer and as the head of planning to make you aware of the risks with that, in terms of if the applicant was to appeal, and there's the potential for costs associated with that, and the not simply from a financial point of view, but obviously when costs are awarded, it is because the local planning authority is seen to be acting unreasonably, and so it's a reputational thing, if you like, as well. So I think it's just bearing that in mind, because obviously the officers in our report, we have made the recommendation we have, because we do feel, given what the inspector said in the previous application, it will be difficult for us to defend an appeal in this situation.
Perhaps you should ask us to do it for you then.
Well, that is an option. That is an option. That is obviously an option, but I think, I don't know if this would be a hearing anyway or not. It might only be written representations, but but no, I have to make you aware of that risk, as I say, and I'm obliged to do that. And we don't know what those costs would be at this point in time.
Okay.
Can I just raise a point? Sorry, Chair, may I just raise an additional point? Without prejudice to the decision that's going to be taken, it's my understanding that the protocols for committee would provide the opportunity for the nomination of a member of the committee to represent the council at any subsequent hearing or inquiry if it was to be appealed. So I just wonder if that needs to be part of the decision that's been made here.
On that point, you would make that decision after you've decided whether or not to actually refuse permission.
Okay.
I think, Chair, is it an appropriate time for me to just comment? as members will be aware, if you are minded or thinking about refusing the application against officer recommendation, as you've heard, you must do so for reasonable planning grounds, and in the event of an appeal you'll be required to provide evidence to substantiate those reasons for refusal, because if you don't, then there's a possibility that the council can be considered to have acted unreasonably, and as you've heard, there's a risk that in those situations the council could be ordered to pay costs to the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you. We've kicked this round all over the place, and I think that we now really have to come to the conclusion. It's been moved and seconded refusal. All those in favour of refusal, please show. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against refusal. Those abstaining. So that's refusal is the way forward at this stage.
You'll now need to nominate somebody to represent the council in the event of an appeal.
I think we've got a volunteer in Councillor Brownridge. There you are.
I think you'll find that's a pressed man, Chair, a pressed or a pressed woman in this case.
Yeah. Okay, we move on to the next application, which is for Fairbank Primary School, Grasmere Road, Royton, and hopefully we won't have any traumas. There's too many issues around this. If I could ask the officers to outline the application before us.
Thank you, Chair. So this is, yes, item 7, Fairbank Primary School, Grasmere Road in Royton. And this is a application that proposes the demolition of an existing building to the southwest corner of the site and the erection of a single-storey extension to be used as a day nursery and which is supplemented by an external play area. So if I just introduce the slides, we've got the site location plan that shows the location of the site on the western side of Grasmere Road, between Windermere Road and Buttermere Road. And on that plan, you can see the shaded red area, which indicates the approximate position of the proposed extension. Next slide we've got here is a perspective view of the existing building, and to the corner we've got the replacement building and the associated supplementary outdoor play space. So we've got the proposed site plan on this drawing, which shows at the southern end of that plan, if you like, at the bottom, the position of the proposed extensions, and you'll see that they are situated behind 2 residential properties that are adjacent to the site. We have the existing floor plan that shows the current configuration of the site, and to the left of that plan, unfortunately you can't see my cursor, but to the left of that plan is the position of the building or the extension that would be removed, and that would facilitate the erection of the proposed extension, which is single-storey, as you've seen on the perspective view, and that's reflected in the elevations. So here you've got the existing elevations, and then we have the proposed elevations that highlight the proposed extension. Again, I'll just leave that perspective view on the screen just for context. So the application's referred to committee because the council is the applicant, it's also the owner of the land, and the objections have been received to the application, and they are on the grounds of noise disturbance, loss of privacy, and concerns about drainage. So in terms of noise, there has been a noise assessment submitted with the application, and that's been considered by colleagues in environmental health, who raise no objection, subject to the conditions that are set out on the report, and that includes condition 4, which would require a construction environmental management plan, and there is another condition on there that would restrict the operational hours of the proposed use between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. In terms of drainage, United Utilities commented on this and raised no objection to the scheme, but did suggest that further information was required on the drainage strategy, and that's basically informed the imposition of conditions 6 and 7 on the recommendation, which require, or one of them at least, requires further information to be submitted regarding a drainage scheme. So in terms of the design and its relationship with existing dwellings, I think that's a key point that needs careful consideration and has been done by officers as reflected in the report. It does have a fairly close relationship with the curtilage of the adjacent properties. That is an existing situation, of course. That is part of the curtilage of the existing school, which the extent of the outdoor space could, of course, be used for ancillary purposes to that use as a school. So essentially we're looking at any additional impact in terms of noise disturbance primarily. And as you've heard already, Environmental Health have raised no concerns with the noise assessment. And the building is located at the far end of the curtilage of those adjacent properties. In terms of its design and appearance, hopefully you'll agree that it integrates with the existing arrangement in terms of the design and layout of and form of the existing school building, and officers consider that's acceptable, having given it consideration against our general amenity and design policies. So in summary, the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the report, Chair. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions of the officers at this stage? No? Okay, thank you. If we open it up for debate, Councillor Brownrigg.
Yeah, can I just make one suggestion that condition, I've lost it now, 5, it says the nursery hereby approved should be only open. Can I suggest we put the nursery building in there? Because obviously the nursery use, but the concern will be if the building was ever used outside those hours, wouldn't it, in terms of the noise for residents? So could we clarify the nursery refers to the building rather than the use?
Yeah, that's okay, yeah. We're done. Are there any other issues? Could I then move approval? Seconded. All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. And that's the whole of the agenda for this evening. Thanks for your attendance and patience.